Seriously concerned. We read with interest, and obviously we were lobbying very hard to ensure that the G20 in its meeting in Osaka had a strong commitment to the maintenance of the multilateral trading system, and importantly created a roadmap to enable the reform of the multilateral trading system to ensure that it's relevant in the 21st century. I put out a statement after the communique was issued, expressing our support for the actual general direction, but really criticising in a way the lack of an action plan. So at the moment the global trading environment is precariously poised. There is a capacity for serious diminution in the effectiveness of the way in which the WTO operates, and that is a direct consequence of the current tensions between the US and China. We are disturbed that any single deal that's cut between US and China may not respect the actual operations of the multilateral trading system. And we think it's time for middle powers, great powers, to stand up and actually express their view. We welcome the view of Croatia in that. Certainly ICC Croatia, which I'm here celebrating the 15th anniversary, is very important in crowding in the views of Croatian business to ensure that they're also heard. So we think it's in a difficult space at the moment. We think there's a crisis looming, particularly around the way in which disputes will be heard and settled, and that can fall over at any time. And if you can't have an accountable process to ensure that disputes are settled and legally binding, the outcomes are legally binding, then the actual importance of the WTO will immediately diminish. I think the reality of the way in which global affairs needs to operate in the 21st century, there needs to be a lot more partnership between policymakers and the private sector. I think what we're finding when you look at the lack of trust that's now expressed by populations in their governments and policymakers, that they need to actually be supported and actually have active engagement with the private sector. The private sector is still extremely well regarded by the population. What the population is saying when you look at the Edelman survey on global trust is that they want business to show leadership. If the traditional organs that actually negotiate agreements were to recognise that fully and engage with the private sector, we'll actually have a much more effective pathway, or develop much more effective pathways to resolve some of our pressing issues. So if we continue to operate in a context where diplomats talk to diplomats without engaging with the private sector, governments talk to governments irrespective of the interests of the private sector, then that is a pathway which is bound to fail. A pathway which is actually integrating the views of the private sector is one that's much more likely to be successful. So new forms of diplomacy, respecting public diplomacy, respecting second track diplomacy, are necessary. We take very seriously our responsibility to enable business worldwide. And we look at business. Business is not just big businesses. We actually think that one of the most important components of almost every single economy is small, medium enterprises and micro enterprises. So we want to enable an environment where Croatian businesses can be successful. And we actually believe that one of our roles is to ensure that we can hear the voice and give voice to the interests of Croatian businesses. We're using digital platforms to enable that. The fact that I've come here today is a sign that we're very interested in the views of Croatian business, particularly the next generation of businesses, about what is going to be needed to enable an entrepreneurial culture for them to be successful, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to employ people. They're the ones that are going to invest in the economy. They're the ones that are going to improve the prospects for Croatia. So we actually think that there is a role, there is a voice. We're very pleased. We've got Croatian business involved in a very important negotiation that we're supporting at the moment in Geneva on e-commerce. We've got Croatian involvement from the ICC Croatia in a very important global issue to do with Global Pact for the Environment, about how you regularise globally environmental rules and regulations. So I think we're showing that if Croatian business wants to stand up, we can open the doors to give them a stronger voice, and they can amplify their voice through the ICC.